Fantastic Four is not doing fantastic at the box office. Its opening weekend was good enough. It well outperformed Thunderbolts and Captain America Brave New World from earlier this year, but its second weekend saw a 66% drop off, which is a bad number. And here's where it gets a little bit confusing. Its critic and audience scores are comparable to Superman's, if not just a little bit better, but all along the way, Superman has shown much better legs and has had better holds. So the question, what's going on? Why is Fantastic Four struggling at the box office? Hi, my name is Sean, and I love to talk about movies and TV way too much. With that in mind, go ahead and join me down below in the comments section. Let me know, why do you think Fantastic Four is struggling a little bit at the box office, and why is it that all three of this year's MCU films have underperformed, despite at least two of them being, generally speaking, very well regarded by the fans? With that said, let's get started. Reason number one, the Fantastic Four just aren't that popular. In particular, if you compare them to Superman, the Fantastic Four are nowhere near as popular as Superman is. They're kind of some of those comic book characters that, generally speaking, most people have heard of them, most people are aware of their existence, but they're not all that many people's favorite comic book characters, specifically in the general public. I'm sure in the world of comic book fans, you can find plenty of people where the Fantastic Four are their favorites, but when you talk about the general public, non-comic book readers, Superman is dramatically more popular than the Fantastic Four. And some of that is as simple as their previous movies have never been particularly good. Of course, you have the Roger Corman one that was never officially released. Then you have the Tim Story movies, which were like fine for their time, did well for their time, but once again, they weren't groundbreaking. They weren't beloved films. They were like, yeah, it was like we did some Fantastic Four movies and we moved on from them. And then, of course, Fan Four Stick from 10 years ago, widely regarded as one of the worst Marvel movies of all time, and thus they've never really gotten a good foothold on the popular culture. You know, even as simple as having TV shows, where there was an animated show back in the 90s when I was growing up, but it was nowhere near as popular as Batman the Animated Series, X-Men the Animated Series, Spider-Man, Superman the Animated Series. Everything else was more popular than the Fantastic Four animated show of the time. And just to add into that, Superman has consistently been on television in live action and animation for the last 35 years. And so just in raw comparison to the other superhero character of the month, Superman is dramatically more popular, and it's more likely that people are going to want to go check out Superman, a new version of Superman, then want to check out Fantastic Four. Reason number two, I think they just picked a bad release date where they were only 2 weeks after Superman. As just established, Superman, almost without question, is more popular than the Fantastic Four, and his movie opened first, and it's the movie kicking off a new DCU. So there was a number of different things that made Superman kind of suck all of the air out of the room. Thus, when Fantastic Four comes out 2 weeks later, it's just the other one coming out. It doesn't matter whether it's better or not, whether you like Marvel more or not. The more interesting film for the more interesting, more popular character was Superman, and it was there first, and it sold tickets. It scratched the comic book movie itch for the month of July, while being just inherently probably more popular and more in demand, generically speaking, than Fantastic Four. And I think Disney completely misread the room. They should have given Fantastic Four Blade's release date, which I believe was in November. Now, you drop that in November, move Predator Badlands into October. There's already a bit of a horror flavor to Predator, so I think it works well in the month of October. You put Fantastic Four, like the first week, very early in the month of November, so you have 2-3 weeks before you get to the Thanksgiving corridor where Wicked 2 and Zootopia 2 come out. and it gets 2-3 weeks of being the big movie. It's nowhere around any other comic book movies. But the way Marvel played this, they had 3 different MCU films come out in a 6-month window of time. Also, 2 weeks after Superman. Also, a month after Ironheart. A week before Eyes of Wakanda. It was just a very comic book saturated window of time. And they could have pushed it back, and it would have been the one movie in a 4 or 5 month window of time scratching the comic book movie itch. And instead, they put it right after Superman, where Superman sucked all of the air out of the room. 3, overall demand for comic book movies has shrunk while the supply of premium comic book movie content has expanded. There was a point in time when there was just an insatiable appetite for more and more comic book movies, and no matter how, as quickly as the market could produce them, they would make money. You go back in time, Suicide Squad was not a well-received movie, and its box office was still like $700-800 million. Like, movies that people didn't like still did great, compared to movies now that people are saying are really good and they don't do nearly as well because the demand was greater during the last decade. But reached a point in time where the interest kind of capped out. And it's not that the genre's gone. People, of course, still love these movies, but it's not nearly as much demand as before. But every studio is still trying to grab for that comic book. They're all trying to scratch the comic book movie interest while we're cranking out TV shows, whether even things like The Boys, which scratches the itch in a different way, My Adventures with Superman, animated versions of it, of course, all the Marvel Disney Plus shows, Superman and Lois. There's all of these different superhero type shows out there that are premium content, while Sony did their villain universe, while we're launching the DCU, while Marvel still's happening. All of this content is still out there, but the demand has shrunk. And thus, each individual project tends to not do nearly as well as they used to do. The novelty of a comic book movie isn't nearly what it used to be. Certain projects, there's high demand for that specific thing, and therefore they'll still hit $1 billion. Spider-Man's going to do fine next year. Deadpool and Wolverine did fine last year. But general interest, general demand for most of these projects has shrunk. And thus, kind of all of them are, the vast majority of them are performing dramatically weaker than they would have during the last decade. Reason number 4, Fantastic Four isn't as rewatchable of a film as Superman was, where Superman is so lighthearted, it's so fast-moving, it leans into quirky side characters, whether you're talking about Green Lantern or you're talking about Crypto. There's just a lot of cutesy elements that make it like a very digestible, watchable film. By comparison, Fantastic Four, actually one of the things I liked about it is that it's less jokey than most Marvel films. It dials back the humor. It allows the movie's weight of the stakes of the world to kind of sit there a little bit. Well, when you do that, it's not quite as entertaining, superficially speaking, as something like a Superman or even most other Marvel movies. And that doesn't mean it's worse, but it isn't as immediately like, oh, I want to go rewatch that again. It also doesn't have like the cameo factor of, oh man, it was so cool when this happened. I want to take someone else to see the movie with me so I can see their reaction to this thing happening. Like I did that with Deadpool and Wolverine. I wanted to see how my wife would respond to certain people showing up. So I saw it in extra time just to see her reaction to things. I did it with Doctor Strange 2 as well. That certain rewatchability, in particular in the early weeks before, all the leaks have happened, everything like that. And you just rush to see the second time. Well, once again, to the credit of the movie, the film doesn't do the cameo thing, which I like about the film, but that also takes away one of the reasons with other projects I rewatched it a second time. Reason number 5, it's a period piece film. And I think this is one that some people are underestimating about where some of the interest here has kind of dwindled a little bit, is that period piece films are often a tough sell. They don't immediately hook people as quickly as films set in modern times or, sci-fi future things. Even though this is a very sci-fi retro future story to it, it is a period piece film. It's set in the 1960s, and there tend to be a harder sell. There are, of course, many counter examples to this. You can look at Sinners earlier this year that here in the United States absolutely knocked it out of the park. But Sinners didn't knock it out of the park anywhere else on the planet Earth. It made all of its money right here in the United States. And so period piece films tend to be a tougher sell. And in particular, you're trying to connect with younger audiences. And as soon as it's set in the past, it feels older and it doesn't feel as youthful and it doesn't connect quite as easily with some younger generations. Reason number 6, MCU is a damaged brand. This is something many people have been talking about for years now. I've been talking about this for years now, but the brand Marvel used to sell tickets in and of itself. It almost didn't matter what the movie was. People were interested because they were so bought into the MCU. And in particular, late into phase 3, it was just, people trusted they were going to get a good movie or a great movie out of the MCU, with a handful of exceptions to that. So much so that even Captain Marvel, a movie that now, generally speaking, most people accept as one of the weaker entries in the MCU, made over $1 billion. Even at the time, there weren't a lot of people saying, this is it. This is like the best thing they've ever done. People weren't saying that, but it still made $1 billion. But you have enough times where people go to the movies and they're disappointed and they feel lost. And then compounding that with, they tried to watch the shows and then they watched a couple of them that they just didn't enjoy, so they stopped watching them, and they find out a movie's coming out that is a sequel to a couple TV shows, and they're like, I don't want to do homework. I feel lost. And what was once fun, this interconnected universe, became too much, and all of a sudden it's homework, and people aren't interested in doing the homework anymore. And thus, you look at the MCU and it's like, instead of feeling like I trust that they're going to put out a good movie, it's, you need to convince me this one is worth seeing. And do I have to watch stuff in advance? And so you look at the last 2 movies where Thunderbolts, despite the fact that audiences and critics said, man, this is a good one, this is like a return to the good old days, people are like, I just don't care about these characters. I don't want to have to go rewatch Falcon and the Winter Soldier and all this other stuff to remember who these characters are. So I'm just going to sit this one out. And a movie that a bunch of people really liked dramatically underperformed. Now, Fantastic Four doesn't even have that problem. It's a standalone story. You don't have to do any homework. And so it opens stronger. And once again, word of mouth is really strong. But that interest is just kind of dwindling because the brand is damaged. People perceive of it differently. Just yesterday, after church, I was talking to a guy. Hi, Chris, if you happen to be watching. And we had this just long conversation about how fun it used to be to go to Marvel movies and how much more complicated it got once they started doing the TV shows and they just weren't as good. And it feels like they're turning a corner, but still you have to be one back. And there's a lot of people that still need to be one back. And they did a course correction, but it takes time for people to actually watch those projects and think and believe you and feel that and not feel like they have to do the homework or whatever. And that's what we're in the middle of right now. The lingering consequences. The projects are better, but the damage was already done. This next one is related to the last one, but number 7, the general interest in the MCU has shrunk. There's still a core fan base. That's why opening weekend was still great. So you put out a Marvel movie that gets good reviews, that's about characters people have wanted to see done right. And so you get this, $125 million opening weekend just in the US. But that's the core audience. The broad audience, because the damage is brand is broken, the brand is damaged, this outside of the core, all this other stuff has shrunk. It's not nearly as big as it used to be. And the general audience is dramatically more hesitant. So opening weekend did totally fine because the core audience is much easier to convince to buy a ticket. The core, the diehards. But the general audiences, the random guy at church that's been burned too many times, that, he's got kids, he's got a job, he's like, I don't want to pay a ticket to be disappointed, pay, $100 to take my family to be disappointed again. I want to go if this one's actually good. And that's that broader general audience, and they're so much more skeptical. The core is there. Us on the internet talking about this, there's a lot of us. It's not a small group of people that are still doing this, that will still buy opening weekend tickets. But what they need to do is repair the damage with all of the other people. Final one, the fandom has started to age out, and they haven't replaced the younger generation of fans. And what I mean by this is the MCU is nearly 20 years old. It's 17 years old. So those original fans that were in high school when the first movie came out are now in their 30s. And they're married and they have kids, and they can't rush out to the theater like they used to. And what the MCU did for the first 10 years so well is continue to pull new people in. And you had all sorts of young audiences that were excited about the MCU. Looking at my demographics throughout the history of my channel, it's largely high school and college-aged dudes. And so much of my audience was built covering the MCU. So it was high schoolers very excited about Marvel movies, and then they graduated into college. But since Endgame, Marvel hasn't done a good job of building that same excitement and brand loyalty amongst younger audiences. Like, my kids super pumped about about Spider-Man movies. My son loves the Venom movies. But most of this other stuff, it's a much harder sell. He's just not as interested. And when he's hanging out with his friends, they're not talking about Marvel the way that middle and high schoolers used to talk about Marvel. And that's what happens when you have kind of a lot of these projects that aren't good on-ramps. That they require you to watch a bunch of stuff. If like, all right, do you want to check out this movie? Well, first you need to watch WandaVision, and you need to watch this, and there's too much backstory. You make it really difficult to get new 13-year-olds and 15-year-olds into your franchise if for them to enjoy the new thing, now they have to watch all this stuff going way back in the day. Like, stop and think about this. If you're 15, to enjoy Captain America Brave New World, you need to watch a movie that came out before you were born. That movie is primarily a sequel to a movie that came out before you were born 17 years ago. That's wild. That's pretty crazy. That's kind of the fun of the MCU, that it's been around a long time. It has this legacy, but it's also, at a point in time, a burden. It's not the fresh, cool new thing anymore. It's the legacy franchise that their dad's been watching since before they were born. And they haven't done a good job with the on-ramps. And the things they have done, like, let's do Miss Marvel, let's do that, those haven't successfully actually converted new fans. It was the wrong way to do it. And they haven't built up the new stars. So there's not like the big stars of the last two phases that people are really invested into. The people that are still the stars are the people that were launched in 2010 and 2008, once again, before modern day high school freshmen were born. And so they're not doing a good enough job of replacing the fan base, the people that are in that prime age range where they love to go opening weekend and they love to be on the internet watching channels like mine and watching theory videos. The stuff that grew my channel, the people that grew my channel 8 years ago, that you're now 25 years old, you're 30 years old, you're 23 years old, but you were in a certain window, and they haven't done as good of a job capturing that new generation. And Fantastic Four is exciting for me. It's not, I don't know how exciting it is for a 14-year-old. Even though it doesn't require watching anything. It should be, but there's a number of things about it that make it not so much. So you have a movie that all the core showed up for, but not the next weekend. That's the problem they ran into. Anyway, those are my theories, as my ideas as to what is holding Fantastic Four back, why it is struggling at the box office. Let me know your thoughts down below. Check out my MCU rankings around here. Did the villains, final battles, the movies, and keep talking movies and TV too much. Bye-bye.